Phronesis. Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this beautiful world. My name is Scott Allen, and I am the host of Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. I am an associate professor of management at John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio, USA. I'm an author, an entrepreneur, a speaker, a nonprofit founder, and the host of 2 podcasts. I'm also a husband and dad of 3. You just heard from Kate, my daughter, who wrote and performed the Phronesis intro. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion on all things leadership. My guests are scholars and practitioners, and we cover timely, relevant topics and incorporate practical tips designed to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Now, I am proud to share that Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association, an association that is near and dear to my heart. ILA brings together leaders and those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ilaglobalnetwork.org. If you like what we're up to, please click subscribe so you can stay up to date as we release new episodes each week. You can also share what we're up to with others. And now, today's show. Everybody, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I have Elena Antonacopoulou. She is the founder and director of GNOSIS, an international interdisciplinary and independent research and leadership development institute. She has had professional appointments at a number of universities, Liverpool, Manchester, Warwick, and she currently holds visiting professional appointments at Western University in Canada, at the University of Lincoln in the UK, and the Royal Norwegian Airforce Academy. You are all over the world. I love this. She has been published in the world's best journals, the Academy of Management, Learning and Education, Journal of Management Studies, the British Journal of Management, Journal of Management Inquiry, Management Learning. She has co-edited 5 books. I think we're going to touch on maybe 1 or 2 of those today. She is a certified coach with the International Coach Federation, and she is involved in all kinds of things. To get a little more information on Elena and to learn about how to connect with her, you can look at the show notes. But Elena, what do you do in your spare time when you are not around the world and writing papers and engaging in think tanks and coaching others? And wow.
Well, I do have a life, believe it or not. Well, I love my long walks, meditating while I walk with my mate, Dexter, the dog, who you have seen before the start of the show. And when I am in my fitness mode, which I have to accept that I haven't been as intensively engaged in the course of the lockdown with all the consequences that implies, I like to spend time in the company of my friends, either doing Zumba dancing, salsa, bachata dancing, boxing, and Pilates, and all sorts of fitness regimes. So I do live a full life. And of course, I have 2 children, which ensure that I don't have any time for myself half of the time.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we met because you reached out to me. And I believe the email said something to the effect of, you have this podcast called Phronesis, and you have not even explored what that word means. And this is my area of expertise. So I wrote you back and I said, well, you are the person I need to know. I've had a few people. In fact, yesterday I had someone say I should change the name. And I've had a few people kind of wonder about the origins. Elena, the origin is very, very simplistic. Okay. Can I tell you the story? And it's a little bit embarrassing potentially for someone who has expertise in this space like you do. There is a jazz band called Phronesis. And I thought, wow, that is the coolest name for a jazz band. So I looked up the definition of the word. And of course, you can look and see different versions, but practical wisdom. So I always just loved that word, but I didn't necessarily study or understand the depths to the degree that you do, and some of the other words that are associated with it, right? Because we're going to Aristotle here.
Oh, very much. We're going to Aristotle and Nicomachean ethics. Absolutely.
Yes. So I think the origin of it is that I loved the word and I loved the notion of
Oh,
practical wisdom. I loved the notion of blending in some ways scholars, academics, and based on those conversations, what can we take from the learning? So I'm excited to sit and listen to you talk a little bit about Phronesis and talk a little bit about maybe even some of your thoughts and observations on words that are adjacent and terms and concepts that are adjacent
sure.
to it. So
I am doubly excited because in reaching out to you was in fact, as I said in my email to you, to congratulate you on enabling the community of leadership scholars to celebrate a concept that it is at the essence of what leadership means.
yeah.
And I'm not the only scholar in our field who celebrates that connection. My colleagues and now the people I will be more actively working with at the Leadership Institute at Ivey Business School in Western University in Canada have developed the leader character agenda, where they embedded Phronesis and practical wisdom at the core of what it means to develop leader character, to demonstrate leader character. And colleagues in Norway, like Olaf Eikeland, have written extensively on that. Colleagues in Oxford have written about. So I'm only one of many colleagues who have appreciated that there are certain treasures, both in language, in philosophy, and in life, that if we bring more to the forefront of our awareness, we can actually use in these most critical of moments as we rewrite the future of humankind, if I dare say so, to celebrate why practical wisdom is an essential and practical tool, a means by which we can live life and understand leadership in the process.
So well said. So well said. So take us a little bit back to Aristotle and his way of thinking, and even maybe some concepts that would be adjacent that we would see in his work.
Of course, the late John Schotter was a wonderful philosopher and practitioner who understood the essence of phronesis, but he wrote with my friend and collaborator Charidimos Tsoukas, who is very embedded within a phronetic orientation, both as a scholar and as an educator. So he is definitely much more knowledgeable than I am. But as I said already, I mean, people like Olaf Eikeland have written books and actually know Aristotle's work better than many Greeks put together. And he's Norwegian, which is why I appreciate him dearly. But again, just let's be practical. What you set out to achieve here, which is really the celebration of what this podcast is intending to provide, is that you bring to the fore the notion of phronesis. And phronesis in Aristotle's notion, if we go back to Nicomachean Ethics, was what he understood as the reasoned and true state of capacity to act with regard to human goods. Now, there are many, I mean, we could actually have multiple podcasts on the roots and extensions of the concept. And this can be found in some of the stuff I've written, because like many others, I had to go and trace the development of the concept before I too brought it in my leadership research. But again, staying focused, phronimos in Greek means good, well-behaved. Okay, so I've learned as I grew up many a times, be a good girl. Elena, phronimi. And can you hear the indentation in my word? So there is almost kind of an expectation that you conduct yourself. It's not just behavior. So it's really, how do you come to be who you are? So phronimos is someone who is not just acting well or is governed by some moral and ethical grounds and principles, but it's also someone who creates with the intent to serve the common good. And MacIntyre, I guess, was one of those Alistair MacIntyre, who developed this even more in bringing it, with his notion of after virtue. But simply put, if anyone wanted to understand what phronesis is, we can use notions like discernment, practical syllogism, insight, wisdom, virtue, moral excellence. But the thing I want to distinguish and bring to the conversation and appreciation of the concept, because that's exactly what I saw you achieve with all the podcasts I have been enjoying listening to as soon as I discovered you, was that the notion of phronesis is also associated with poiesis.
Say that again.
The notion of phronesis is also associated with the making of things. Ποίηση.
Okay.
Ποίηση in Greek is a beautiful word, as is δημιουργία, creation.
Yeah.
And the beauty of phronesis is not to be understood because you call it practical wisdom.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty. It's both practical and it is about wisdom. In other words, it is both the doing, but it is also about the contemplation. It is also about the discernment, as I said before. So for me, as I defined it in my own writing, phronesis is a creative act, especially when navigating the unknown. And that's where, for me, phronesis matters most. When we were coming to situations which are not just paradoxical. And I've heard your other podcast colleagues rightly point out to complexity and obviously the VUCA and all the rest of it. But with all due respect, I think we're missing the essence of phronesis as that which enables us to engage with the unknown in its own terms. So it's not just what happens when we're faced with dilemmas, paradoxes, and crucible moments. Of course, that's where our strength of character shines and guides our action choices, which is why we mark it as an act of practical wisdom.
Interesting. So can you think of an example in your own life or in maybe events that people would be well aware of? Maybe it could be history or it could be current events where you see this playing out?
I think it plays out in our everyday life, from whether I will choose to have that extra piece of chocolate that I know I shouldn't, but I will, to all the way to how we engage and interact with each other. To me, that's exactly what is beautiful about this concept. It's not about necessarily elevating the expectation that it only belongs to some and not others. Of course, it is about aspiring to develop and reflect our humanity overall. But in everyday life, let me tell you how I educate in my leadership development programs for phronesis and with a phronetic orientation. Let me use a typical example. I bring you to a situation where I invite you to think of yourself as a practicing junior doctor.
Okay. Who
is called upon to provide support to an elderly patient at home. On arrival and in the discussion, brief discussion with the patient, you are being told explicitly that that patient would like to die at home. And in the course of the examination, you see signs of a cardiac arrest. You now have to exercise action. Of course, you will provide them the support that they need, right? Medical support.
Yes.
Do you take them to hospital or do you leave them at home?
What do your students say? I don't want to answer.
And no one has to answer. Well, I mean, even doctors don't want to answer because it is those junctures where your professional education and therefore your technical and episteme, scientific knowledge are guiding you in what you choose to do. But ultimately, your phronesis is what defines what I would call your moment of leadership.
Yes.
In standing up for what you stand for. In other words, I would personally, if I was a doctor, although I know the rules would expect me to have taken this patient to hospital because that is the expectation, I would have opted to provide them care to ensure that if indeed these are their final moments, that their wishes are respected. Now, does this make me a better doctor than someone else who follows the rules? Well, the miracle on the Hudson River is one other example that I use to say miracles are called miracles because we step beyond the standard operating procedures and create the conditions which would have been perceived impossible or too risky to take. So phronesis provides, in fact, that capacity to master almost kind of, and it is, of course, rightly associated with strength of character because it is about how do you create that sense of stability in yourself, groundedness, in fact, is how I call it, centeredness, so that you are one with the situation and your reflexivity is not a knee-jerk reflex reaction, but it is A way that I found in my research with military, what happens with pilots when they are faced in dangerous situations, they are not flying the plane, they are the plane.
That's an interesting way of phrasing it.
Totally. And I see it in everyday life when I drive my car. And of course, many of us haven't forgotten what driving looks like, which is why it's getting a bit of getting used to. But, we don't often think that the right judgment when we navigate and negotiate the use of the road with other cars, cyclists, pedestrians, and everything else that may show up unexpectedly.
Yeah.
But phronesis is that which I would argue could and should guide us more to master the temper when someone cuts our way. Also to consider why is it that, for example, breaking the speed limit because I'm in a hurry is not something that I would consider. And believe me, I'm as guilty as charged in that department. I sadly have this impression, don't say that to anyone, huh? That's a secret between you and I. I have my Michael Schumacher moments, as you say. Now, does that make me phronimos? Well, I would argue the capacity to see ourselves and therefore how we act and choose to act is partly what phronesis is about. So phronesis is not just about always doing the right thing.
Yes.
But it is knowing when we don't.
So if Sully needs to land the plane, I imagine there wasn't protocol for landing the plane in the Hudson River.
And again, because we've done extensive research in analyzing that case, as many other colleagues and other professions have found value in looking at that, they say that Scully was trained to land, in water. And of course, from, again, my experience of aviation in my broader research in the sector affirms the fact that simulation gives them a whole range of terrains to negotiate. It's part of their training. Ongoing, if you will, practicing, which is the other thing which is critical in all of what we're discussing today in relation to phronesis. In this particular case, the expectation was that he should have flown back to the nearest airport, LaGuardia, from which they departed. And yet, if you followed the film, I think for me, the golden moment was the moment he explained that he eyeballed it.
Yeah.
Right. That's phronesis. If you want the best example of phronesis, is how is it that I come to that moment, call for judgment to act?
Yes.
He didn't know that he could land the plane safely on the river. The river was actively utilized by the boats who were transferring passengers. So it wasn't as if it was all calm and clear. And we know for a fact that even after the successful landing, there were mistakes in that they didn't close some of the pockets. And of course, that's why the plane started to receive water. But it was also dangerous for the boats that approached the plane to rescue the passengers when they came out on the wings of the plane, if you remember, because obviously of the suction effect and for the disturbance with, their presence, if you will. But the fact that he broke the standard operating procedures was the thing that was also valuable in the way that this event was captured in the film that subsequently was produced. And in that it shows that he took the risk of however many years, 40 plus years of experience flying for a few seconds of a choice. But for him, he was compelled to do that and break the rules because his judgment was what guided him to do what was for him the right thing to do. And he proved that it took multiple attempts in the simulator before they could confirm that it was possible to return to the airport.
Wow. You mentioned a moment ago practice. Talk about practice. Talk about practice. One of my favorite scholars is K. Anders Ericsson. He's the individual who coined the term deliberate practice. And so he wrote about expertise and how people become to put themselves in a situation to work at the highest levels, regardless of domain, chess or memorization or surgery. And it was really interesting because I think there's a lot of connections we could make to leadership and
oh my goodness.
practice, right? But talk about the role of practice in
Right.
Phronesis.
So let's, we've done enough Greek lesson. Let's do an English lesson now. This is 20 years of scholarship, Scott.
I love it. I love it. No, I'm so excited.
Well, I wouldn't say cost me my career, but I did put my neck out. I was the Scully of my of the practice-based studies debate. Because as I'm sure you know, one of the themes that has populated the leadership debate is the leadership as practice. Yes. And in the same way as there has been a leadership as practice, there has been a strategy as practice, an entrepreneurship as practice, and many, many other management practices, which somehow the preposition as practice makes them and us see them differently.
Yes.
Right. Having spent 20 years researching social practice theory and understanding what it means to look at the praxis, the practitioner, and what it takes to perform an act that we can call a practice, I concluded that there is a practice we have not understood fully yet, and that's the practice of practice. Now, I've lost your listeners by now. And
I feel like we're going down a rabbit hole.
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully not, because the reward in the carrot that awaits you if you pick your head up from that hole is to recognize that there is a big distinction. And this is where I'm afraid the use of the two concepts with the same spelling is confusing many. It's not about the verb practicing with and the noun. So I'm not playing the Wykean notion of organization, organizing, management, managing. Yeah. Of course, I respect that immensely, and it is part of the processual unfolding, of which phronesis is also an important element of. But I am talking about what happens when we repeat. A doctor is in practice, but is practicing every time they perform a surgery. So you can perform the same surgery 1,000,000 times, and you can still be in a practicing mode. Yes. So practice is about repetition. Yes. Not replication. And I draw on Deleuze, who emphatically highlighted the distinction between repeating and replicating. Yes. In recognizing that repetition is always about difference. So for me, practicing is about the leap of faith.
So say
and
more.
That's exactly what Saligan had done. Right? So he might have practiced them over 40 years, multiple times in simulations for multiple terrain landings. But when he had to rise to the moment, practicing became that very process which enabled him to try out something that he was not going to be clear from the beginning. It would result to the desirable outcome. But his intention became the impact he worked to deliver. Yeah. That's why he merits being called a leader. Yes. In that moment. So practicing is what we all do all the time in not just mastering any practice, but in choosing how we live.
I like that phrasing, in choosing how we live.
Yeah.
So when you're having this conversation with students or others, what are some other concepts that you often weave in? What are some other ways of thinking about this, or some other topics that are adjacent to this conversation?
Well, again, I'm going to add another layer of complexity now that we are swimming deep.
We were in a rabbit hole, and now we're swimming. I love this.
Of course, we've always been swimming. If you play with the Sally analogy, we are very much landing on a river, and where there is water, there is potential and life. Yeah. I would say that one of the things which mattered a great deal to me in the way in which we would need it to advance understanding leadership, not just as a practice, but leadership in practice, was how are we practicing leadership? Okay. And staying with the water metaphor is what prompted me to make the 2 points. First, to see and highlight the ship in leadership. And you can take it literally and metaphorically. By that, I mean, what platforms do we create so that we collectively grow? And within that, what does this growth mean in terms of advancing our humanity? which I also see as a central aspect of both phronesis and leadership. Now, there is where we go back to not only discussions around issues of, not moral positions and ethics alone. Of course, we do that. And that's why ideas in and around leader character matter a great deal, because, of course, that's what we tap into and bring in this practicing to figure out, or as others would say, in our way-finding pursuit.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
So practical wisdom is not that in a flip of your finger, you come up with the idea. All that deliberation before you act and decide that that's the wisest thing to do implicates the practicing that is happening, whether you're deliberating or, as I would say, reflexively reassess a situation. In my conversations, in my leadership development programs, in my writing, one of the things that I have been particularly keen to see that we understand better is the value of reflexivity, which is different from just viewing something, reviewing it, or reflecting on it, or in the course of doing it, as Donald Schoen would say, reflection in and on action.
Yes.
So review, or view, our ways of seeing is our ways of looking. Right? So we view things from a particular perspective. Now, phronesis is a critical component in that because it allows us to ponder curiously. Is there more to it?
Yes.
Second point is review after the event. When you replay, you literally view it again.
Yes.
Except this time, the post-rationalization is the danger of interpretative mechanisms like sense-giving, and sense making, which may post-rationalize and provide explanations that create the truth.
Say that one more time.
When you review something after the event, you enter in a process of post-rationalization. Now, the danger is, of course, this process of interpretation, akin to what we talk in our field as sense making and sense giving, are in equal measure potentially biased views.
Oh yeah.
Okay. so that's the main message there.
Yeah.
Which says if you look at something, be curious and ask, is there more? If you review something, don't just say what has happened, but why am I understanding it this way?
Yes.
And why is it making sense in another way for someone else?
Yes.
Okay. There is more to it. When you're reflecting on something, either whilst you're doing it or after you've done it, reflection has that capacity of questioning your assumptions. Okay? So you build through your character the confidence to say, now hold on a second. Why is it that I assume that if I did this, this would have been enough? And that's how, going back to the example with which we started, if you were a doctor, you can't assume that only what the rule book says is what is the right thing to do. So everything has to be adapted as things emerge. And that's where phronesis matters. But phronesis matters and is manifested even more in our action choices. And that's where reflexivity lies. Reflexivity is this moment where we are in a situation fully present. So we show up and we are experiencing it by allowing ourselves to feel and participate as an insider at the same time, simultaneously, as we have the capacity to extrapolate and see it from an outsider's perspective.
Yes. Ron Heifetz might call that getting on the balcony. You're kind of in and out of the game, or reflection in practice, like in the moment.
Let me give you a way of looking at it slightly different.
Sure.
We are, most of us are stuck in front of the TV watching football these days with the with the soccer game and the World Cup. And so here is the point: when you're in the field of action as a football player, you don't really see. You're in the game, and yet you have to be able to have this panoramic view, so that you can project that I am ready. And for me, the joy is when I watch the players sensuously correspond with one another.
Say more about that.
Oh my God, sensuousness is the secret intelligence that I don't think we've even begun to tap into, which is so important to phronesis.
Yeah.
So many people say, how do you know you've done the right thing? Well, you can wait until after the event, or you can actually emplace yourself as you deliver what you do. And such emplacement allows the reflexive gaze for you to form a stance, and better still, stand up for what you stand for. That's the new concept in leadership studies that I've been working for the last few years. We first developed it in order to explain what does entrepreneuring,
yes,
and this notion of entrepreneurship as a practice, how can we understand it? And that's where we explored emplacement as an extension of enactment and embodiment. Because emplacement is our entanglement in the event, enough though for us to be able to practice our response whilst responding reflexively, accounting for that which emerges.
So Elena, what is your background? Because you have such a wide variety of experiences, knowledge that you are bringing to one space. Talk about that a little bit. You've been embedded in business schools. You've published in management journals. You talk about your background that brings this very expansive perspective to the space.
Thank you, Scott. It both is strength and a curse, as they say. I am very curious as a person. In fact, if you ask me, what do you specialize in? I will often say I am a learning scholar. And I mean in the double sense of the word. And more recently, I've positioned myself as an axiologist. I'll say something in a minute about that. To me, being a learning scholar is that I have devoted 30 years of my scholarship as faculty in business schools to educate. And therefore, I've always cared immensely about the quality of learning experiences and experiences of learning that I was helping to shape, and the impact of such learning, enough for me to have felt that in doing justice to be the importance of understanding the role of learning in change, in renewal, in growth, be it strategically, organizationally, individually, socially, I needed to tap into anthropology, philosophy, human geography, psychology. I am broadly read. And actually, that has been what made always very difficult for people to only limit me because I write on organizational learning broadly and organizational change. And I can sit just as comfortably within colleagues that are within the OBHR, human resource management space, as well as with colleagues in strategy and public policy and so on and so forth. So I am someone that sees entanglement not as a concept, but as a way of thinking, breathing, and living. And what I actually, one of my most important principles in my identity as a scholar is that I practice what I preach. And here is the essence that for me, I can't speak about something unless I lived it. And that's why you see me so passionate in fighting with colleagues who insisted on practice with a C. And I kept insisting on practice with an S. And at some point, it was called the S&C war.
Well, as we wind down for today, what are you reading? What are you listening to or streaming that's caught your eye in recent months that you would want listeners to be aware of or to know about?
In some respects, I know I was cheeky, if I can use that term, to say, having listened to your podcasts, I would certainly encourage listeners to spend time tracing and systematically following the discussions, because each one of them is unique and there's so much learning in each of them. And I think if one were to look at the body of knowledge that the podcasts are creating, to me, they manifest different dimensions of phronesis as a concept. And I love that. So thank you for being with me on my walks. If I'm not meditating, I hear you. I'm listening to you and you other beautiful people that you featured. Thanks to my friend Sally Newham, I'm reading The Alchemist by Coelho. Although I knew his work on other things, I hadn't actually read The Alchemist. So thanks to her who presented it to me as a present. She sent it to me at home. I have that to play with at the moment, but I'm never short of stuff to read. Unfortunately, I'm one of those that always carries enough paperwork. And the reason why I have the Aurora as my background is I'm so full of
books
stuff that it wouldn't make for the most tidy background compared to yours.
Oh, well, that's a great way to be. I was watching a documentary on, I think it was Bill Gates, and he has a tote of just 8 or 10 different books that he is constantly carrying around to learn about different dimensions in the world. But I love your description of yourself as a learning scholar. I think that's wonderful. I absolutely think that's wonderful. And I listened to these probably 2 or 3 times. So I'm looking forward to re-listening to this episode 2 or 3 times and really taking it in, really, because as you've been told before, I'm sure you're thinking, well, I could say 50,000 feet. I mean, you are looking at this in a very unique and very cool way, I think.
Thank you, Scott. I believe that it is in these interactions that we see more in each other than any one of us can see in ourselves. And that's actually the beauty of what you have created and the search for phronesis. We can't be phronimos in and on our own. We need the others to allow us to discover more of what we can bring to the world by being who we are and settling with ourselves in just accepting that we being who we are is enough.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for the good work that you do and for advancing our thinking in new realms and new dimensions. I absolutely love it. Have a great day, and I look forward to our paths crossing again soon.
I look forward to seeing you again soon, Scott, as well. Thank you for the opportunity. Okay. Really appreciate it.
Be well.
You too. Take care.
I would be lying if I said that at certain times in that conversation, I wasn't swimming a little bit. Back to this water metaphor. Elena is thinking about leadership and thinking about the world and how we help prepare people to be successful in incredibly challenging scenarios, challenging situations. And I love that. I love engaging in conversations where maybe I don't understand all of it, where I can look back, reflect, and challenge my own assumptions, expand my own thinking. And Elena, you have done that for me, and I'm sure for some of you who are listening. And that is the practical wisdom for me in this conversation, that to get new places, to grow, to advance, we have to challenge ourselves to be comfortable engaging in dialogue and conversations where maybe we don't always understand, where we are being stretched to think in new ways. And Elena helped me do that work today. For that, I say thank you for your good work. Thank you for advancing our thinking. And for all of you listening, listen again because you'll hear something new, I promise. Be well, everyone. Bye-bye. You, my friend, have just finished another episode of Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. To get in touch with me, visit www.scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I can also be found on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Now, if you have feedback, I would love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening to Phronesis. If you like Phronesis, I have a second podcast. It's called the Captovation Podcast. That's with an O, Captovation Podcast, where I speak with experts on the topic of designing and delivering incredible presentations. And now, Kate's twin sister, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.